Hello again, everybody. My name is John D. Healy. I do a podcast called It's Good to Talk. My sponsors are Liffey Van Lines, a moving company here in New York City, and they've been around longer than Jeopardy. Speaking of Jeopardy, Austin from Jeopardy will be a guest on the show in a few weeks' time. Liffey have been around, I should say, as long as Jeopardy, 50 years. A lot of experience when it comes to moving. Let Liffey do the lifting. Also give a shout out to the Irish Examiner USA, Paddy McCarthy. It's a great newspaper. Catch up on all my events, music, arts, literature, and a little bit of politics from here and from across the water as well. I always have guests on. I have a guest today, Robert Polner. I'll be with him in a moment to talk about this book. I'll hold it up for a moment. And it's all about Paul O'Dwyer. The book itself was presented to me at an event last weekend in Queens in the Long Island City at the Mayo Society. It was presented to me by the president of the Mayo Society and the vice president. That would be Kieran McAndrew and Maureen Gibbons. And they gave me the book as a gift for my good efforts in promoting features that are Mayo related and all that. And what is the Mayo Society? The Mayo Society has been around since the 1800s. And they go back a long way and they do a lot of good work for people, but they're looking for members always. And they will be presenting their manifesto in a show coming up soon. But they did tell me it'll all be about sports, music, the arts, and writing. And one of the things they're involved with is the Shannon Gales, which is, I'll read it out for you and then I'll get to my guest. It's football, hurling, and camogie, boys and girls, age 5, no experience necessary. I think at the age of 5, you don't have experience. But, anyways, they have information on that. And you can reach out to the Mayo Society. You can join the Mayo Society too. And it's a good organization to be involved with. They're based in Queens, a meeting the first Tuesday or second Tuesday of every month. So, let me get to my guest, Robert Polner. I guess I pronounced your name properly, Robert.
Yes.
So, Robert, let's talk about this book, An Irish Passion for Justice. It's about Paul O'Dwyer from Bola. Talk about you and why you went to the effort to produce this book. You have someone helping you, Michael Tubridy. He's, I guess, a co-writer, is he?
Yeah, Michael and I are colleagues, friends from way back. I guess he was the Irish side of the equation here.
Okay.
But I was very thankful to have him. And my background is really as a reporter here in New York. I was I kind of had a cook's tour of the tabloid newsrooms in the period I guess we're hearing about now with the Trump trial in a way, but the 80s, and I did spend some time at the New York Post, then the Daily News, but most of my time was at New York Newsday, which was a full service New York City daily, competing with the Times in terms of coverage of New York and the rest of the world.
Okay.
And they also covered Northern Ireland very well, I might add. At the time, many newspapers were not stationing anyone there. And my beat was City Hall, and I spent time covering a lot of beats, including immigration, but one of them was City Hall, and that's what got me interested in politics. Although I never actually met Paul O'Dwyer, I had heard a lot about him. I knew people who knew him and liked him and were involved in various movements here involving mostly Northern Ireland at that time that he was engaged in. So I always had a curiosity about him and also his older brother, who, of course, was the mayor of New York in the middle of the 20th century.
Well, Robert, let me get rid of some of your curiosity because I'm very familiar with Paul O'Dwyer. He's from a little village in Mayo called Bola. There's a famous song called Three Pubs in Bola, as everybody knows. And when Paul and his older brother and his parents grew up in Bola, it had the church, of course, the post office, and the 3 bars. Paul's parents were school teachers in the Bola village or town, and both of them actually. And back then, that we came out of the history of England, where England had taken away our Irish language and shut down schools, and then before that was what was known as hedge schools, where Irish children had to be educated like on the sly outside, without in case the English soldiers would see them being educated. Now, getting back to Paul, you mentioned there about the involvement in the Troubles in Northern Ireland. Paul O'Dwyer was very instrumental in the Good Friday Agreement because when he shook hands with Bill Clinton, Bill Clinton promised Paul O'Dwyer that he would get a visa for Gerry Adams to bring Gerry Adams to New York because Gerry Adams wasn't allowed at the time on Irish media. That would be RTE, radio television. RTE is the Irish national broadcaster, okay? And they had stopped politicians like Gerry Adams from being able to broadcast. That changed when Paul O'Dwyer met with Bill Clinton and the wheels got in motion to set up the Good Friday Agreement. So you can pick up from there.
Well, I'm glad that you've read my book, John, or you will read my book, but
No, I read the book. I've already read.
reflected in the book.
Yeah.
That's coming out, by the way, on May 15th. A little plug there.
Well, I'm glad I got
Absolutely. Everything you said was true. And growing up, he was kind of at the tail end of the generation of Irish volunteers, Irish fighters in the War of Independence, very much shaped as a young person in Bola by the experience of the war and the Civil War that followed. His parents were opposed to the Free State arrangements, and he brought that kind of determination to do right with him in everything he did. In the United States, when he moved here in 1925, his four brothers were already here to help him, and he worked on the docks, and he made his way to St. John's Law School in Brooklyn, and he started his career, in Brooklyn as doing kind of criminal defense work for indigent and criminal clients, which is actually an interesting chapter. But very soon thereafter, as soon as he could, he got involved in kind of civil rights work. And typically his clients were radicals, including in the labor movement at the time during the Great Depression here in the United States, worldwide. He represented people who openly associated or were proud of their Communist Party membership at a time when kind of unregulated capitalism was showing its vulnerabilities and had collapsed. People were looking for alternatives. And some of that socialist labor orientation also he brought with him from Ireland and the experiences of the Irish fighting the British. And it's interesting, he didn't hesitate to represent people who were more radical in many ways than he was at times. And that was because he was developing a worldview that was very much grounded in small d democracy. And one of his favorite authors was Tom Paine from the American Revolution. And that meant also an anti-colonial kind of outlook. And he felt that even people with radical stripes, had to be able to participate openly in democracy, associate with whomever they wanted to, and not fear suppression from the state. That was his ideas about the First Amendment that he brought in a way where I think steeped in his Irish past and developed here in New York with groups like the National Lawyers Guild, which the NLG, which still exists, which was an alternative to the kind of all-white conservative American Bar Association. He was very quick to join them and stick with them through thick and thin during even the McCarthy period, the anti-communist HUAC period in the 50s and 60s.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you mentioned St. John's University because I studied at St. John's University myself. Paul O'Dwyer studied law. I studied marketing, and I enjoyed my years at St. John's University. Going back to the O'Dwyer's little school in Bola, I did mention, I think, somewhat that the schools then, when they were developed, I went to a school similar to in Glenamoy, which was built by my grandfather, who was a stonemason. And before that, I mentioned the hedge schools. But the local church, the priest, was the manager of the school, and brought with it the Catholic dominance because they had more power than God. And indeed, if I'm right, and you can correct me, I think Paul's mother was fired by a priest for not doing anything wrong, but she had 7 babies, and the priest was against the idea of a woman having so many babies and being a school teacher at the same time. So, I mean, that priest must have been a bit of a bee, because I've dealt with priests like that. Do you remember that?
There was conflict there, and as you said, and there was conflict between his father, who was the schoolmaster of the local schoolhouse run by the canon, and that was kind of career long for Paul's father, and I think Paul developed some of his distaste for hierarchical authority from that, and a lot of bitterness, which Bill also remembered in his interviews. Paul, growing up, pretty much had a very supportive environment in Bola. By no means wealthy, of course, but they got by, and he was comfortably raised in the sense he was well loved, and probably would not have left Ireland if he had his druthers. But the economic prospects were such that that's what people did in those days.
Well, Robert,
and like I say, he buoyed up here in New York in 1925.
Yeah. I had another writer on here, councillor Jerry Coyle from County Mayo. He's from a little village similar to Bola in Usala, which is not too far from where I was born. And in that book, Jerry Coyle's father describes people noting the beautiful scenery of Usala, and it is a beautiful place. But Jerry Coyle's father said, scenery doesn't put food on the table. You can't eat scenery. So it may be beautiful scenery, but you're struggling day to day to survive. So, of course, the O'Dwyers left one by one. He got the train down to Cove, County Cork. That's where ships left to come to America, including, I think, the Titanic might have made a stop there before it finally met its demise from a piece of ice. So let's continue more with Paul getting into the legal framework as an attorney here. I know he did a lot for the Irish, he did a lot for immigration, but he got involved with other groups. I think the Sandhogs was one.
He became a lawyer for unions, and that fit very much with his pro-labor orientation throughout the Depression and then all the way through the 50s, when labor leaders were getting persecuted by the HUAC and Joe McCarthy's committee. He defended one labor leader who headed up a hotel workers union and ended up getting deported over, and this was fairly not that uncommon. It was over something on his initial application for living in the United States that was slightly off. So he was accused of lying, and Paul defended him. So he had a lot of clients like that. He also defended fellow attorneys who were friends of his in the National Lawyers Guild, who the committees also went after, including to try to get them from being blacklisted or even jailed. He himself seems somehow managed not to face prosecution or accusation. But in his own community, in the Irish American community in New York, he was sometimes, when he went out campaigning as a left-wing politician in those years. His very first campaign, by the way, was in 1948 in Inwood, to largely Irish as well as Jewish community. And he didn't beat Jacob Javits, but he was accused of being a communist, and he was called Pink Paul. And this followed him throughout his career, and his only defense was to say, I believe in people's rights to hold opinions and participate in a democracy, or the democracy doesn't really exist.
Right.
And you can attack me for defending communists, but hey, I'm not going to change.
Okay. Interesting. He was also friends with, I believe, Mayor Dinkins at the time, and they did march together at a St. Patrick's Day parade, and they marched alongside the gay lesbian community who were banned from marching in the St. Patrick's Day parade by the AOH, the Ancient Order of Hibernians. And I believe that when they marched up Fifth Avenue, that some of those, I guess, pro-Catholic people threw beer cans and whatever and all that nonsense at them. But Paul stood to his guns and with the community, and now today they're allowed to march in the parade when then they weren't allowed to march in the parade. Old-fashioned, but the OH is cool. They're starting to mellow out a little bit now because they too need new membership.
Well, there was a lot of anger at ACT UP at the time, gay rights organization, for interfering with St. Patrick's Mass. This group that he marched with was called ILGO, and a number of their members who were gay were from Ireland, as it happens. Many of them were not. They were not. They were New Yorkers, born and bred. But he was already had a cane. Was walking with a cane by that point in his life, but he was pretty consistent again in taking that stance that everyone should be able to participate. You know, and this stance extended all the way to Northern Ireland. It was a principled stance. It didn't always help him win elections or gain popularity, which is, I guess, the fate of someone who balances advocacy at the barricades with a political career. Paul did that by being consistent. You won't find too many cases, or really any, where he betrayed his ideology or his point of view or his past statements when he ran for office, for example. What's that?
I said, well, that basically came from Bola, from his grassroots, because he saw what aggressors did and how they got away with stuff. And you have to protest, just like myself. In 1981, I was a protester in Dublin when Bobby Sands died on hunger strike, along with prisoners, okay? And Maggie Thatcher was the bitch thing that let them die one after the other. The only good thing that came out of that was membership of Sinn Féin IRA increased dramatically, because all of a sudden now we know about our history and we know what we're protesting about. Unlike maybe some students today that don't have the full knowledge of what a protest is about. A protest starts when the system fails. That's my belief. But back to
exactly right. And a lot of bad things can happen when people are not allowed to participate. That was Paul's view of what he called the causative violence in Northern Ireland, that it came out of discrimination and a feeling of being marginalized, and that has to be the root of it, rather than he did not interestingly, although he favored the IRA, of course, and was most concerned about the Catholic population in Northern Ireland, he did not applaud IRA provisional IRA violence. He did not condemn the IRA violence, and the same was true of the Protestant paramilitary groups. He felt that the issue was the British, as he felt in Israel when Israel was founded. The issue was the British, and once they're out of there, people who are on both sides of whatever the line is will have to work things out, live together. And so, one of the things that really surprised me, John, doing the research with Mike Tubridy was he was interested in and circulated a kind of settlement proposal from the Ulster Defense, from the UDA Association. Now, these were cold-hearted murderers of Catholics, right? But he was willing to talk to them and hear them out on a kind of position paper, and he circulated it. That did not make him too popular at the time here in New York or overseas.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Robert, because our podcast is called It's Good to Talk. My guest is Robert Polner. We're talking about Paul O'Dwyer, and we're in the middle of the topic, going back to the troubles in all Northern Ireland, when Paul O'Dwyer was very much involved, and I would say instrumental in helping the Good Friday Agreement. He also marched when Frank Stagg died, another Mayo man, on hunger strike in Wakefield Prison in England. And when Frank Stagg died on hunger strike in Wakefield in London, what happened then? Well, the IRA started their bombing campaign, okay? And if I must say, they were very effective at their bombing campaign. They had the technology, they had the wherewithal, the means withal, and the motivation. Because if you don't have motivation, you have nothing. Okay, I'm going to interrupt here to ask my young friend, Jimmy Grady, to sing a song for you, Robert, and for my listeners. And Jimmy is going to sing a Mayo song dedicated to the O'Dwyer family. And it's called The Red and Green of Mayo, one made popular by a band called the Saw Doctors. Jimmy, let's sing the song. So Jimmy will be right here, and then I'll come back to you.
Oh, the green and red of Mayo, I can see it still. It's soft and craggy boglands, its tall, majestic hills, where the ocean kisses Ireland and the waves caress its shore. Oh, the feeling it came over me to stay forevermore, forevermore. From its rolling coastal waters, I can see Crowpatrick's Peak, where one Sunday every summer the pilgrims climb the reek, where St. Patrick in its solitude looked down across Clew Bay, and with the ringing of his bells called the faithful there to pray, there to pray. Oh, take me to Clare Island, the home of Granuel. Its water harbor fishes from the herring to the whale. And now I must depart it, and reality is plain. May the time not pass so slowly, for I'll set sail again, set sail again. Oh, the green and red of Mayo, I can see it still. Its soft and craggy boglands, its tall, majestic hills, where the ocean kisses Ireland and the waves caress its shore. Oh, the feeling it came over me to stay forevermore, forevermore, forevermore.
Anything else you would like to talk about in the Paul O'Dwyer? Where can we buy the book?
You can buy the book anywhere you would normally buy books. If you went to BarnesandNoble.com, Amazon, but a good place is just the Cornell University Press website.
Okay.
Right now, they're publishing it, and their imprint is called Three Hills. So it's Cornell University Press.
Cornell University Press. Okay.
Yeah.
And
if you're interested in that, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, my listeners, I have my copy thanks to Mayo Society. Thank you, Kieran. Thank you, Maureen. Yeah. So the retail price of the book is probably $40, maybe. I don't know.
It's $37 actually, but
Yeah.
There are different prices, different websites as well.
Okay.
So yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, it's a great publication, and it's just recently printed, and I know all the hard work that goes into publishing a book, because I published a book just at the end of the coronavirus for my good friend Tony McGurn, and a lot of work goes into, a lot of research.
Did you have footnotes?
What?
Did you have footnotes?
He has a good memory, so between the two of us, we got it published. He's a bit like Steve Hawkins, and I'm a bit like Helen Keller, but we still managed to get a book out, and without any spelling mistakes, which is unique for both of us. Indeed.
The typos are like weeds sometimes. They're
Indeed,
there.
I like the way you mentioned that. They're like weeds, is right. So now we know where we can get the book. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I just think, O'Dwyer was not known so well by the younger generation. He's certainly known by anyone whose parents, let's say, came across in the 1950s. That he was a topic at the dinner table, whether you were for or against him. He was involved in so many issues that to read the book is to sort of read a history of of New York and the diaspora. Paul, what I came to realize is he really took to heart his role in the diaspora,
Yes.
right? Which is very important, I mean, for every ethnic group and every religious group. If you look at the Haitians now, they're suffering a little bit because they don't have that kind of diaspora to organize on behalf of
or the connectivity.
Their country back home, and which is falling apart, and what should be done. And they often have a very important human scale kind of understanding of their own countries that the State Department or the White House or the Congress might not have. Paul would take any ally, and of course the Irish have a huge history of this, of organizing coalitions, not always agreeing, but coalitions to fight for particular issues. If you take the McBride principles, for example, and that's what's necessary. If you're going to be a progressive person now as a young person, which is why I think the book is maybe still relevant to younger progressives like Paul, you have to fight now again and again. You may not win, but you're building partners and coalitions. And then eventually you'll have some clout.
Right. No, I totally agree with all of that, and I must thank you and Michael Tubridy for your hard work and effort to making it a fine publication. You should be very proud of it, and I'm sure it'll do well. I mean, I'll be plugging it and all that. But when you mentioned indeed, my pleasure, is like the societies, like the Mayo Society, the Bola Society, and all of those societies here in New York, they gel with what's going on back in Ireland. So we may have left where we're from, but we never forget our roots. And if you want to grow trees, you need roots and you need branches. So the Mayo Society is a branch of a root of the likes of Bola, Glenamoy, Belmullet, and little villages all over Ireland.
Correct. And Paul was not just political. He founded the Irish Institute on the west side of Manhattan that funded mostly cultural endeavors here and in Ireland. And he helped found or support forestry planting in Southern Ireland, in Mayo, and in the West. And he was involved in so many things: academic law. And of course, we haven't even really. He really took. We haven't talked about the civil rights movement, which he took every opportunity to go down south in the early 1960s and to defend voting rights. So he was an unusually forceful immigrant figure in New York. Yeah.
Well, I noted that there when he was like some of his friends in the book as I read through it. But Jimmy Breslin, did you come across him, that guy?
Yeah, Jimmy's in the book a lot. I knew Breslin as a reporter, of course, a little later in his career. He maybe mellowed some. And when I was down at City Hall, he used to call me at my desk every morning or so and say, "What's going on?" And then hang up before I had a chance to say much of anything. But he and Paul were very close. Were very close, as he was with Pete Hamill. And Paul had this unusual candor about politics. He was just outside of it enough. Didn't always help him with his campaigns. The highest he got in politics here in New York was the city council president in 1970s.
What impressive,
just in time for all the difficulties with bankruptcy and blackouts and Son of Sam. But Paul had a number of friends who were newspaper columnists. Murray Kempton was another. The gentlemanly, erudite Murray Kempton was very highly respected, loved Paul. And I think it was, and Jimmy just adored Paul. And Pete said, other than Bobby Kennedy, Paul was his only friend and who was a politician in his time as a journalist. And I think that was because of Paul's candor. Also, he had just an uncanny ability to read a room and to just talk to people about what was going on, who stood where and why. And so he was also very helpful to young journalists like Niall O'Dowd when he was starting the Irish Voice, would come and see him and sort of get the lay of the land and other other assistance. Paul was very helpful to. You call him maybe these days an immigrant broker, in the sense that the first chance he could get to help someone, whether they were a colonist or just someone right off the boat, he did try to get them jobs and contacts and places to live.
Excellent. Well, Liffey Van Lines were my sponsors. They were big sponsors too of the Irish Voice, and very good friends with Neil O'Dowd. And Neil O'Dowd indeed was a good conduit for people connected with the Good Friday Agreement. Okay.
Oh, sure.
You did say there about, role models and all that, and like I noticed one thing about the book, the way you and Michael have put it together. It's very descriptive writing. So if a reader is reading it, you can almost taste and feel and sense what's happening. And I found that with my namesake, John Healy, who was another journalist, newspaper guy from Charlestown in County Mayo. And John had that gift too. And he could write and describe stuff. One of his books is called 19 Acres. And the other book he wrote, which becomes like a term, No One Shouted Stop. And No One Shouted Stop. I don't know, maybe you heard of it. It has got into the English language when things get like chaos and no one shouts stop. And that was John Healy, Charlestown.
I'll look for that. Yeah. I was a journalist, so that's probably where some of the writing comes from, and or less than sort of the traditional academic type of writing, because I'm not an academic.
Yeah.
When one of the people working at Cornell Press wrote me an email saying, Professor Polner, I said, I appreciate the promotion, but I have to let you know I'm not a professor. So.
Right. Okay. Well, as I say, anytime I get a compliment, I take it. And people do leave comments in the It's Good to Talk, my podcast. And people do ask me strange questions sometimes. It's like last week I had Walter Brewer on, a young IT recruiter. He looks very, very young. And people said, that guy has a big fancy job. How old is he? And then I bumped into Walter and he said, today is my birthday. I said, oh, you're 30 years old. So now I can tell people he's 30. Young Jimmy, you just heard singing. I met him when he was 11 and a half or 12. And he corrected me one night. I said, he's 12 and a half. And he said, no, I'm not 12. I'm 12 and a half. And then later he's 15. So Jimmy is 15. Jimmy's getting old, I'll tell you. So anyways, I usually sign off my native language. And I have to come back to another topic when I let you go back and do some more homework. And I still speak my native language. Shinshgale means that's the story. Agus Beishgale means we'll have another story. I'm going to say slán to you, Robert, and let you go, because I have some more promos to do, okay? So back to you, my listeners, and I want to mention some things coming up. I will have Brian Layden on here in a few weeks. Actually, the next podcast will be Brian Layden, historian, and we will be talking about the elections coming up in Ireland for the European Parliament, very important, coming up in June. And also we'll be talking about the local elections coming up in June also, actually. There are 27 countries taking part in the European elections, and Europe is 27 countries. The UK or England is not in they left Europe, so they're no longer with us in Europe. And therefore, Northern Ireland being a part of Europe, because as Robert said, well, he almost said it, anywhere the English are, they leave a bit of a mess. And with Northern Ireland, they left a mess. So I'll be plugging away for United Ireland as soon as we can get our heads around that one, part of the Good Friday Agreement. So that will be another legacy of Paul O'Dwyer, Neil O'Dowd of the Irish Voice, and other people that have campaigned, the Jerry Adams, the Bill Clinton, and all these people, and indeed people like myself, because you have to keep beating the drum to get attention about issues that are important. Otherwise, we would be forgetting about Bobby Sands and the 1916 people that died, not De Valera, because he had an American passport and he was half blind. Good excuse to get away from getting a bullet. Anyways, let me see what else. I forgot to mention, I have a big art show coming up in this weekend and the following weekend, and it's on Ryder Avenue in the Bronx near 138th Street. I think we can put a poster up for you in a moment. and it starts this Saturday and it goes to the end of the month, we might say. And all kinds of artists there. Nancy Purnell, my good friend that passed away, donated me a lot of art, and I have to raise some money there for the Ronald McDonald House from the art proceedings. So a lot of the art will be discounted by 70, 80% and maybe less. A lot of activities, if you like football, if you like darts, if you like board games, all of those activities will be provided on at the same venue. Chance to win prizes, free draws, free raffles, and you can win lots of things. We shout out to the sponsors. Sponsors are important. So LTB Mechanical, they're here in New York and they do heating and ventilation, air conditioning and all that. Big Apple Mini Storage, of course. Elite Healers Massage Therapy here in New York on Park Avenue. They usually donate a gift voucher for a free massage on Park Avenue. So you never know, you might get a free massage from Elite Healers on Park Avenue. The Irish Examiner USA and the United Print Group, they do all kinds of branding products from t-shirts, pins and caps. And Tom Sanchez has been on my podcast before. It's worth going back on that one. And Hell's Kitchen tax experts are my tax people, and they keep me safe and stress-free. You're not worrying about the taxman, because I met him in Ireland and I didn't like him and he didn't like me. But as Robert said, we had to kiss and make up. It wasn't easy, but sometimes you have to compromise. So I'm going to sign off with the European national anthem, and it's a beautiful, beautiful anthem. I hope we get a good version of it today. And so I'll sign off on that. Until we meet again,